A healthcare worker on the front lines of the pandemic in BC says she can't count the number of times she's run to a bathroom or empty room to cry, adding the amount of death she's seen in the last year weighs on her every day. Those heartbreaking revelations come from the nurse at Abbotsford Regional Hospital in an emotional Instagram post made after the death of another patient because of the virus. Kendall Skuta's account of the efforts to try to save the man's life and the toll the pandemic has had on her has gone viral. She says she was on the COVID ward when the man in his 50s with no pre-existing conditions went into cardiac arrest. Despite 35 minutes of CPR, he didn't make it, adding when he was pronounced dead, everyone stood there for a minute, silent, exhausted, heartbroken.
It's really sad to see colleagues in that sort of distress. Unfortunately, she's not alone, and we've seen it a fair amount over the last number of months during the pandemic.
Tim Guest is president of the Canadian Nurses Association and says the stresses of the last year are having a toll on nurses who were already stretched before the pandemic.
There's been increased workloads, concerns about availability of resources early on. There was certainly a lot of talk about availability of personal protective equipment. Now it's the burden of wearing it all day and having to change the way we work.
And he says nurses have witnessed a significant amount of human suffering through this crisis.
A lot of loss. And many nurses experienced those things when families weren't able to be present. And they have bridged the space between families and patients and individuals that they've gone through these life altering and sometimes events where they did not survive.
Guest adds before the pandemic, 80% of Canadian nurses surveyed rated their mental health as good or excellent. But a few weeks ago, that dropped to 47%.
We've heard lots of nurses, more and more all the time, talk about when the pandemic ends. They are seriously thinking of retirement for nurses that are at that point in their career. And younger nurses are talking about, well, maybe this isn't the career for me.
Guest says we need to abide by public health orders, echoing the end of Skuta's post, which begs people to stay home, wear a mask, and get vaccinated if eligible. For City News in Vancouver, I'm News 1130's Monica Gould.
India smashing more coronavirus records. What's behind the staggering numbers as we focus in on a country in crisis?